Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. They've just left government, just to give you a teaser. But one critical thing that has been on top of the mind of every Ghanaian or those who play in the finance and economic space is the track record or the report card of the former administration when it comes to the economy. How can we assess them, or how would we fare them when it comes to the economy? Is it excellent, very good, good, poor, or failure? Well, one person who has a better understanding or to do that assessment with him is the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin. On PM Express Business Edition, as we assess the former government's management of the economy, the report card when it comes to the economy. Honorable Dr. Mohammed Amin. How you been doing? I mean, now that you're off office, do you really, now you can see that I can have good sleep, but though you're still a member of parliament?
Well, do you really go to sleep? I mean, we are all in the business of trying to help our country. I mean, we do not have any country apart from Ghana. And so we all are determined to contribute our quota, whether you are in government or you are in opposition, to improving on the living conditions of our people. And so really, we dare not go to sleep. We have to continue to be on this journey. Our roles will be different, but there's a common objective, and that is to improve on the living conditions of our people.
I use the word sleep not as in the rest, but I know when you were the Minister of Finance and the challenges you went through and the little sleep you had, one can confidently say that now at least you can sleep and wake up like 8 or even 9 and say, what do I have to do today?
Well, I mean, to that extent, I think you're right. The pressures were there. It's not the same as they were. And so I can say that, yes, you're right.
You've already been, and those who don't know Dr. Amin, all the way as municipal or assembly and rising through the ranks. So the political space is not new for you. But for you, moving from energy, you have tasted the political system, governance. Did the Ministry of Finance give you any different experience? We've heard a lot of things about the ministry. Going in there, as Minister of State, rising to the top position in that ministry, the level of engagement, the scrutiny, and I remember when the issue about judgment debt came up and the commission, and we were even told about how the ministers now have to scrutinize every document that comes before you. You trust in your lieutenant for the goodwill, but sometimes you also have to do that personal scrutiny.
Well, really, the Ministry of Finance is, how to say it, is the first among equal, right? I mean, because you are supposed to oversee the management of the economy. You are supposed to protect the purse. You are supposed to generate the revenue and then disburse the revenue based on a budget approved by Parliament. And so it's like you are carrying everything, you know, the in and out of our country. You are carrying everything. And so you need to go to such a ministry with experience, with managerial capacity. You need to also go there with knowledge of the economy, because it is not like other ministries where you don't really need subject matter expertise before you go in there. You go in to provide leadership. In the case of finance ministry, you really need that technical expertise so that you can appreciate the advice you are given by your directors, by your advisors before taking decisions. I mean, some of the decisions you take could cost millions of people, you know, in distress. And so you need to be diligent. You need to read and read broadly. You need to consult and consult broadly so that whatever decision you make will stand the test of time. But let me also say that I have seen some of the best professionals of our country in the Ministry of Finance. Very knowledgeable people, technically sound, and they are all committed to the advancement of the interests of our country. And so you can be sure that they will give you the best of advice.
No, but you went in as a Minister of State, and I knew about instances where we heard about how Ken trusted you so much as in working with you, how did you also take up that challenge of the elevation, not just of replacing anybody, but someone you served under, somebody that you respected so much, somebody you trusted so much, and depending on how others may see it, it's like he has come in to uproot our boss. How did you take that personal experience and let everybody understand that we are always called to serve?
Well, it is important that when you are given such an opportunity, you recognize that you are not the best of all. You have a contribution to make. Others have made their contributions. And so, even though I took over from my boss, Ken, I continued to talk to him. I continued to consult him.
You have a good relationship with him?
Yeah, a very good relationship. And he had the institutional memory. I mean, somebody who managed the economy for 7 years, you cannot just come in for 1 year without understanding the context, without understanding the background behind some of the decisions that he made. And so we kept that good relationship. And you also need to know that a boss is always a boss, and you have to be humble. Even when you meet people who are your servants, you have to be humble to them, because there is something you can learn from everybody within the space, whether they are your bosses or they are your subordinates. And so if you go to the Ministry of Finance, they will tell you, I mean, I treated everybody as a colleague, and that we work together. Even the security people in the Ministry of Finance, I had very good relationship. They could walk into my office. I could go out and sit with them and we talk, because you always walk away with information that you really will not get from the mainstream, but you can get from the people that you do not expect, even appreciate some of the issues you are confronted with. You know, so if you want to know how ordinary people in the street feel, your security men at the ministry can give you that sense of how people in the street feel. Even if you don't want to go to the street and sample people and talk to them, you can, just by relating to ordinary people within the ministry, some of them at the lowest level in the hierarchy of the ministry, you can get a sense of how people feel, and that could help in making decisions that will inure to the benefit of the people.
When you came in, and there were questions like, for a while when you started managing things, where has this man been all along? How did you manage all those things as well, to let it not get into your head? Because depending on who you engage in the society, some of the feedback was that good, even for those who do not belong to your party, that where has Dr. Mohammed Amin been all along when it comes to his contribution to the financial space? How did you manage all those things to ensure that you are here to work, these things shouldn't get into my head?
Well, it depends largely on your upbringing, the background that you came from, but also recognizing that this is a calling. I mean, maybe it's by chance it's fallen on you. It could have fallen on somebody else. And therefore, you don't need to see yourself as a know-all person, or you're above every other person. And so you have to be humble. I mean, humility brings a lot of information. Humility brings a lot of knowledge that you will ordinarily not have. Humility, you know, incentivizes people around you to want to work harder than they would have done. And I also was lucky. I had a fantastic boss in the President of the Republic. He gave me the chance, the room, and he guided me where he had to. And I took advantage of every thing that could help me positively to do this job. And for me, it was a learning experience as well. Let me also add that having served in the Ministry of Finance as Minister of State, it afforded me opportunity to learn at first hand what was happening at the Ministry of Finance, how they did analysis, how they interpreted this analysis, and also some of the policies they have been pursuing. And so I became well grounded in those policies. What I could do was to build on what I met at the Ministry of Finance, and also to bring a sense of urgency in the implementation of some of those policies. But you will also notice that I did a lot of external works, you know, particularly working with the IMF to implement the IMF program, and then also doing the debt restructuring with the Eurobonds, Those were significant moments in the lives of our history, our country, in the history of our country. And I took them very serious. I benefited from international experience as well. I talked to many consultants and advisors, both in Ghana and abroad. And I was very happy that eventually we had a successful negotiation and restructuring of our bonds. And also, as you know, the implementation of the IMF program has been one of the major success stories of my tenure, going through 3 successful reviews of the IMF. The last review being on the 2nd of December. And this is why when I hear President Mahama say that he inherited a struggling economy, I worry. He's calling for a national economic dialogue. I worry. I wonder, where is he from? Was he on Mars? Because just on the 2nd of December, the IMF gave a judgment on our economy. The IMF that they have also been consulted since they came into government. They have been talking to the IMF. They have been talking to the World Bank. 2nd December, the IMF gave an emphatic, judgment
about the economy
about
being
the economy being,
but
yeah,
Honorable, how
yes.
do you respond to those who might say that is the numbers, but the reality on the ground is different, and therefore this is the IMF's verdict on our economy?
Yeah.
But again, just like what you talked about, the fact that the security men will give you the pulse of the economy. Go on the street and engage about 10 people. The reactions about the state of the economy is different from what the IMF is saying about the economy, and therefore His Excellency might not be wrong when he thinks that the economy is struggling. They inherited a struggling economy.
Yes, but you also know that when you are analyzing an economy, you know that economies involve trade-offs, right? Every policy that you implemented have trade-offs. Some will benefit, some will lose out. What you need to do as a government is how to balance the effect on the various segments of society. And to that extent, I can say that there were people who benefited. The banks are making huge profits. And if you look at their financial ratios, you will notice that the banks were very happy over the last 1 year. For example, the business community, a lot of them made profits. But there were others who also suffered, the people in the street. And this is why we implemented far-reaching social interventions. For example, the school feeding program, which at the time the NDC left office covered just about 1.6 million children. By the time we left office, it covered 4 million children. You also know about the free senior high school program, capitation grant, livelihood empowerment against poverty, national health insurance scheme, which at the time the NDC left office covered about 4 million or so. By the time we left office, in excess of 11 million. And so these are policies that you will make for those who will lose out on the economic policies that you implement in order to bring them up, to a level that they also can feel the benefits of the economy. But having said that, you cannot analyze an economy without the numbers. That is the yardstick for measuring economic performance. Even if you want to measure how the people in the street feel about the economy, you have to go and do your study, and it will reflect in numbers. And so to the extent that the numbers are good, you just cannot run away from them. Let me also say that it is not always all the time that macro numbers reflect in poverty reduction. But you also know that we have just come from a crisis. The economy has recovered. You are not going to see the improved numbers immediately reflect in society. It has to be sustained. And this is why I expect this new government to be thinking about how to sustain the gains that we have made rather than completely throwing its hands.
Well, Honorable, some will say that sometimes members of your administration are quick to celebrate about the economy recovering and stabilizing, but some also say that now who calls some? This administration or the previous administration took us there. So you might be measured sometimes, and even your other members, when it's being celebrated that we have recovered the economy. That administration took that economy to its knees.
I take a different view. When you say who caused harm, I mean, there is no government.
The ballooning debt that forced your government to do a restructuring.
Yes.
that was something that was caused by your administration.
There is no government that will deliberately inflict pain on its people, especially in a democracy where the same government will want to retain power and continue to implement its programs. And so when you see some of these challenges we are faced with, some of them are attributed to external factors. And you have traveled around the world, you have participated in IMF program, World Bank program, you have read their documents. Even in the United States of America, in Britain, their economies haven't recovered as much as we have recovered because they are still affected by the same external factors that we were confronted
with. But that hadn't got to do with what you see excessive borrowing that took us to that place.
Yes,
and there were advice from people who said that be measured on the borrowing, put it into productive sectors. That is where we were.
You will notice that at the time of COVID, our president was very clear that we needed to do everything to protect human lives. Because you cannot bring lives back, but you can bring the economy back. So we had to take very difficult decisions, including borrowing. And don't forget that every government borrows. Even people who say we have borrowed too much.
To productive sectors.
To productive
sectors that will give you returns.
Yeah, to productive
sectors.
People
who will question the level of borrowing that your administration did and whether indeed it went into productive sectors.
How will you say if you borrowed close to $20 billion and then you add to your GDP 20 billion United States dollars, will you say that the money you borrowed was not productively invested? Will you say that?
No, I wouldn't say that.
That is the record. And so people say that we borrow too much. They are even quoting the debt figures, but they do not look at what the money was used to do. And the only way to judge, to determine how the money was used, is to look at the size of your GDP.
You've spoken about GDP, and the economy grew last year
by
your GDP. More than 7%.
And let me just say that we borrowed, yes, we borrowed, but we added 20 billion United States dollars to the size of our GDP. If you contrast that with the regime before us, under President Mohammed, by 2026, we saw slowdown in economic activity, even though they also equally borrowed 73% of GDP, which we ended the year with. We ended the year with 72% of GDP in terms of our debt levels. They ended the year in 2016 with 73% of GDP. But what happened to GDP? What did they contribute to GDP? We saw a loss in GDP by $10 billion from 2013 to 2016. The opposite is what President Akufo-Addo achieved. We ended the year with 72% GDP, but we saw an increase in GDP by 20 billion United States dollars. And so you cannot really understand the debt numbers if you fail to understand the context. And by the context, I'm talking about what contributions the debts have brought to the size of the economy.
Whilst we celebrate the GDP, I mean growth and everything, when you look at the drivers of those growth, some will argue that it is or can be qualified as jobless growth. And therefore, the argument is that gold production, shooting up GDP, the quality of that growth raises a lot of questions about whether indeed we should celebrate that growth because it has come with not the required jobs, improving the livelihood of everyone out there. We can talk about that one. It's quite debatable.
I think it's misleading to say this because when you say the growth is coming from gold production, extractives, don't forget that for close to 7 years, economic growth in Ghana was led by the services sector, not industry. Gold production is a subcomponent of industry. But our economic growth has been led for 7 successive years by the services industry. So how can you be saying that it is because of gold production?
But that was what the last GDP numbers
you cannot say it's because of gold production. The last GDP numbers, manufacturing, for example, industry, led, for example, and it wasn't only because of gold production. Manufacturing also increased. It came from negative to I think 1.7%, and then by the third quarter, it went to about 3.7%. When manufacturing is growing, what does that mean? They are creating jobs. Okay, energy, the energy sector also grew significantly. Energy grew by close to 7-8%. And what does that mean? Because production is taking place, economic activity is taking place. That is why you need energy. And so it is also a reflection of jobs. Don't also forget that the credit to the private sector also increased significantly. And what does that mean? It means that the private sector is getting the money to invest in growth. And so you just cannot attribute it to gold production. Because even in the days where services sector dominated our growth, gold production was higher. But industry was lagging behind services sector. And so that analysis you are making, I think, is misleading.
But you think that the growth that we recorded came with the required jobs and improvement in livelihood? Because again, some will look at those numbers and raise a lot of questions about its impact on creating the required jobs, its impact on bringing the reliefs to people. You look at inflation, and yes, it has been brought down from 50-something to 23, but still, again, it is high for an economy like Ghana to have inflation of 23%.
Yes, there is no doubt that inflation at 23% is not good for an economy. But you also need to look at the context. Where are we coming from? Again, you will say who caused it. Inflation increased to about 54%. And now it is 23%. You halved inflation in just 12 months. That tells you the level of effort that went into it. And let me also bring your attention to this. Even though inflation may be increasing, with the persistent growth in the economy, the effect is somehow less burdensome. You compare that to the NDC period, between 2013 and 2016, when inflation was also relatively high, even though it did not get to the levels they are today. But because of lower growth, per capita GDP was lost to the extent of $500 per person per capita. Okay, you do not see that now, because whilst inflation is higher, we are also recording higher growth. And that somehow neutralizes the effect to some extent. I'm not saying entirely, but to some extent. Now we've seen that the inflation is trending down, and that is why we decided to invest more in agriculture, because food inflation is a major part of our inflation. And so we decided to invest heavily in agriculture, planting for food and jobs.
But again, the fiscal service says
planting
that
for exports, yes.
That food prices going high was the major driver of inflation.
Yeah, at the time they said that, they also said that it was as a result of the drought situation that we experienced. Other than that, you would see from the end of 2022, food inflation going down, and thereby heavily driving down inflation to the extent that we halved inflation by the end of 2023. But towards the end of 2024, but towards the end of 2024, let's say from October going on, we saw the uptick, marginal uptick, which has been attributed to the spikes, the food prices resulting from the drought that we experienced.
Don't you think that has anything to do with the questions about your agricultural policies, the planting for food and jobs that was supposed to improve food supplies on the market? And therefore, with these years of this program, and we still see food inflation being a driver of the overall inflation, again, raises questions about that policy.
I think that agriculture has been doing well. I mean, as you can see from the data, over the last 5 years, agriculture has been growing consistently, closely following the services sector until last year when we saw industry overtaking both of them. But we must understand the inflation story globally. Globally, inflation rose, went to higher levels because of logistical challenges. The Russia-Ukraine war affected inflation everywhere in the world, to the extent that inflation, even for the advanced countries, went to a median level of about 7.5%. And 7.5% median inflation is really high for advanced countries that usually record inflation of about 1% or less than 1%. And so you could not, isolate Ghana. And also, because inflation in advanced countries went higher, they had to contain inflation by increasing rates, interest rates. That made their financial instruments more attractive. And so we suffered reversals as well. Significant amount of reversals. Some people left the market in Ghana and went to invest in advanced countries to take advantage of the increasing rates. And so you need to understand the inflation story globally as well as interest rate story globally. And you will see that in spite of all this, Ghana has really done well in bringing inflation down from 54%
our
to 23%.
neighboring countries didn't have those high rates, even though they were hit by COVID and all these other global challenges.
Well,
they had very low inflation levels.
No, but I think we should understand that Ghana is a liberal open economy. Cote d'Ivoire and the other French-speaking countries around us are not open economies. They are controlled economies. They don't even have monetary policies. Their monetary policies are dictated by France. You know that very well. And the bulk of their investment, 70–80% of investment in these countries are French investments. And so they did not suffer the reversals, the kind of reversals we suffered being an open economy. And so you just cannot compare apples with bananas. That would be misleading, to say the least.
Honorable, I mean, you talked about these numbers and what the IMF has said and what the Ghana Self Service has said on the economy. But some will say that in the 2024 elections, the biggest item on the ballot box was about the state of the economy and your current state as a Ghanaian. And majority of Ghanaians voted. That is the verdict. That is the report assessment of your administration, which you were the finance minister. What do you take those who push that argument and say that we can celebrate the numbers, but Ghanaians thought that those numbers were not impacting us?
I do not disagree that the economy was a major issue on the ballot, because we all knew that the economy was in difficulty. And as I explained, it wasn't only the Ghanaian economy. You know, most incumbents across the world who went through elections around the same time lost. You know, so it wasn't peculiar to Ghana. And the economy really dominated the political debate. But our view is that the factors that led to our economic difficulties were not generally domestic-induced factors, okay? And so many other countries were facing the same problem. But we had done well within 12 months, okay? If you look at the data from 2022 to 2023 and then to 2024, you will see that the turnaround was quick. The recovery was faster than even anticipated by the World Bank, IMF, and many analysts, economic analysts, even in Ghana. And so we were of the view that once the economy has turned around, the recovery was swift, conditions were improving, we were getting stability, macro stability, which is a condition for economic growth. And even after doing a debt restructuring, where countries that have done restructuring will record negative growth, we were recording an average of about 6.4%, you know, last year. It just shows that the economy was turning to positive levels, which, when sustained, could really reduce the suffering and the economic hardship faced by the people. But the Ghanaian people decided that they wanted a change. And this is why I expect the new government to sustain the gains that we have made. Because when you sustain those gains, it will translate into tangible benefits for the people. But if you come in to do politics, as usual, you lose the point, you know, and you are not really able to sustain those gains. And this is what I've seen President Mahama doing.
Honorable, don't you think that for the Ghanaians out there who were impacted by the GDP numbers, who were impacted by the quick turnaround of the economy, the growth and all that, and they felt that we cannot feel the numbers that Doc is talking about in terms of when President Kufuor once said that we are sitting not to a papa, they realized that these numbers are still not impacting me, and therefore let me look out for the next person who can do a better job when it comes to improving the economy and for it to improve my livelihood?
Well, unfortunately, we do not have any other measure of economic performance. You just can't do it without the numbers, right? And you cannot tell me that if you go to the market to buy something with an inflation rate of 54%, the effect is the same as buying the same thing on the market with an inflation of 23% or with an inflation
which
of
was
9%.
Avoidable because we got there from who?
But I've already explained to you,
Okay.
I mean, unless you want me to repeat.
No.
I've told you the inflation story.
Okay.
And I hope by now you understand
I do.
that merely repeating it
Yeah.
really doesn't make you right
Okay.
over me.
Okay.
I've stated the point clearly. And so if you want to avoid the numbers, then you really will not have an economy. You cannot even interpret economic phenomenon. And so the numbers as they are, I'm saying that they are good and they continue to improve. And if they don't mean anything, why will people, business people, be concerned that the city is losing so much value, you know, depreciating by this amount?
As in the first quarter?
Yes, as in the first quarter.
Perennial,
right,
which happens always.
So why are they concerned about it?
But if the basis was also solid.
It is because of the numbers. It's because of the numbers. If the depreciation is lower, it's a number that you will use to explain that. If the depreciation is higher, it's a number that you... So numbers mean a lot, except that I also understand that most people do not understand economics or how to analyze and interpret economic issues. And so it's difficult to relate numbers to reality, but that is what it is. You cannot run away from that.
This is PM Express Business Edition, engaging the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin, assessing the previous administration's report card when it comes to the economy. And what do you say about the assessment of the economy? He's better placed to tell us whether they think that they did well, is the economy recovering, or struggling, they are stabilized, or indeed the prospects are good. This is PM Express Business Edition. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we assess the former administration's report on the economy. Is it true that indeed the economy has recovered? Has it turned the corner? For the best person to assess how they fared and also whether they've set the ground for this new government to take off or not is the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. Doc, I mean, in the previous engagement, you spoke about the debt exchange program. As we speak right now, has it been completed or we're still left with the final lap of the commercial external creditors?
Well, it's left with the commercial external credited. We had a total of about 20 billion US dollars of external debt restructuring that we were supposed to do. As I speak to you, we are left with just about 2 billion or 2.8 billion dollars, which are debts that we owe to the commercial creditors. And before we left office, we had started discussing with them. I visited China because China holds up to about 800 million US dollars. Chinese banks, hold about 800 million US dollars of the 2.8 billion dollars. And that accounted for the low levels of upgrading that we received from the international upgrading institutions. They wanted us to complete the debt restructuring to zero before they could upgrade us to our levels. And by their own methodology, even if you are left with $1 to be restructured, which is not, they will not give you the upgrade. You saw they gave us some upgrades, but they were not up to the levels we expected. So we hope that the new government will show much interest and work speedily to complete the remaining debts that we have to restructure.
Honorable, where do you place the firms in the energy sector, the U.S. companies and some multinational from the U.S. companies in terms of the debt as well? Recently, we heard from a senator there, we heard the U.S. ambassador privately pushing for them to be settled and all the rest. Where do you place this category of creditors who are done job for you, especially in the energy sector? And they were complaining that their payments were delayed.
Well, I think that the energy sector players have legitimate claims. When they supply energy to you, you have to pay them. But what we call arrears in respect of them are not part of the eligible debts we were restructuring. And you know that they can be described differently. Somebody can say they are domestic debts because they occurred here. They are not debts as a result of borrowing. They provided service here and you have to pay them. The payment hasn't been done, so they become like arrears, so to speak. And this is why we do not classify them as part of the debts that we were restructuring. But it has been a feature of our energy sector, not today, right? At the time the NDC left office in 2016, the debt left in the sector was about $2.4 billion. We left government with a debt of about $2.5 billion, you know, but it could have been more. Actually, the World Bank report for the energy sector recovery program estimated that in 5 years from the time we did the energy sector recovery program, which is about 2017, 2018, thereabout, the debts were supposed to increase to $12 billion in 5 years if nothing was done. But because of the policies that we implemented, including the renegotiation of some of the agreements, we ended the year with $2.5 billion. It could have actually been $12 billion, you know, so that also tells you the level of effort. A lot of payments were also done in the energy sector. I can tell you, for example, over the last 7 years, we've paid $6.2 billion to energy sector players. 6.2 billion United States dollars to energy sector players. So it doesn't really mean that no payment is being done. Payments are being done.
So what happened to the U.S. companies who were complaining that they were not being given the needed priority when it comes to the debts?
Well, I don't know whether you have to give one company priority just because the company is from the United States of America. You know, all these companies have different contracts with government. You know, the payment schedules are different, and you have to try as much as possible to ensure that there's cash flow. And that is the very reason why the cash waterfall mechanism was introduced, so that all the companies get something, at least in order to continue to provide the service. I know that ECG has faced challenges. The losses has been higher, and government has implemented a number of measures. We still are not getting the results. I believe that is why this new government is talking about privatizing ECG.
Which you hinted sometime when the World Bank about. Do you think it's a good thing to go?
Well, we need to look at it in context. I think that we need to prepare the company to the level that even the asking price will be valuable for the country. And so what I was trying to do was to prepare the company. And so I negotiated, for example, for an audit to be done on the company, the financial audit. I also asked that we should do a technical audit, you know, in order to reveal the challenges faced by the company so that we could put the company in proper perspective, in proper context. And then a decision can be made by that time whether we needed to do privatization or not. But if you don't really appreciate the quantum of challenge the company is facing, how do you just go ahead and do privatization?
So those things must be done first before
you need to
the talk about...
yes, privatization. You must understand what is in the bucket and whether it is valuable going forward to be managed by the state or be privatized. But if you don't have that, I mean, what would be the basis for saying, I want to privatize? And so I had discussions with the IMF, and I said that we are not opposed to ensuring private sector participation. In actual fact, there is already some form of private sector participation in ECG. We wanted ECG to be better managed. We wanted ECG to become efficient, but you just cannot go and say, I'm privatizing, when you do not understand the real issues involved in managing that company.
So it's a good thing that the timing and preparing ECG itself for this major policy change or major policy implementation should make sure that all these things are done before we look at that option of privatizing. Yeah,
because even before you look at the option of privatizing, you must take a decision. Is it worth privatizing? What are the numbers looking at in terms of their financial numbers? What about the technical, you know, aspects of operating the company? You know, before you can even decide whether to look at options or not. And this is why I thought that we should do a comprehensive audit of the company, financial and technical audit. It would tell us the extent of the problem. If it is something we can manage, you know, as a state, why not? Maybe it is something we need private sector to participate. And this is why I'm telling you that there is already private sector participation in ECG as we sit today. But private sector participation in terms of giving assets to a private person or in terms of are giving shares to a private person. Before you get there, you must have a proper analysis of the company and its operations before you even get to that point of making that decision.
No, but with all the reforms that was implemented for the sector,
Yeah.
ESLA and the cash waterfall mechanism and all the rest, and even your talk with the IPPs to try and restructure their debts, why did we still end up with, is it the $2.4 billion?
$2.5 billion, yeah.
Debt with the sector? What happened?
I mean, but this is a very interesting question. Now, I'll tell you a story. Some time ago, a government negotiated power purchase agreements, what we call the power contracts, for this company to supply energy to us. And you are familiar with this. Almost all the contracts had take or pay provisions, which means that if they generate the power, whether you take the power or you don't take the power, you will pay. Okay? And that made our power sector challenged in the sense that you also signed too many contracts and you had surplus. So what it meant is that they certainly will be companies will be collecting money without giving you power because you have surplus. Now the tariffs, energy tariffs, did not capture the payment that you will have to make for non-utilization of the power. The tariffs will only capture energy that is produced and energy that is consumed, not only energy that is produced. So what does that mean? You have to accumulate debts.
Yeah.
And this is what has led us here. You have to accumulate the debts. Now, ECG, when they sell power based on the tariffs. The tariffs which does not include the excess capacity payments. Okay, so how do they pay fully for contract price? That's another challenge. And so there will be a shortfall on the ECG side. Now the government has to come in using the budget. But this is the same budget that should go to support construction of roads, provision of hospitals, provision of water, paying for educational infrastructure. How do you use such a budget which is already tied to pay for a commodity which is a commercial commodity that you sell and must generate the revenue to pay for that commodity? Energy is not a social commodity.
So more of realistic tariffs.
It's a commercial commodity. So when you talk about realistic tariffs, what do you mean?
I'm just asking, is that the option to dealing with that problem?
At some point, the tariffs in Ghana were the highest in the West Africa area. So how will you call that realistic tariff? Realistic tariff should be looked at by, looking at the contract price in the contract, looking at how much energy is consumed, but you don't have tariffs that are already higher and that already leaves out excess capacity payments only for the budget of the government to be used to pay for those debts that have accumulated. So how do you call that realistic tariffs?
So that is not the problem about paying
the
right
so
tariffs to deal with the problem.
It cannot be realistic tariff. The problem is with the contracts. The problem is with the contracts that the NDC government negotiated with the power producers and negotiated take or pay provisions, right? Even though they know that they had negotiated more contracts than needed by the country. And to the extent that we had surplus, we committed ourselves to a surplus, not just small surplus, huge surplus, in excess of 2,000 megawatts. And so you have surpluses, which means that naturally some of them will not produce. And then you go and negotiate a take or pay clause that if you don't take power from them, you still have to pay.
So
if you have debts accumulated and you are not able to pay the debt because the tariffs cannot support the debts that have accrued,
that causes
how can the same people, Honorable Jinapo and President Mahama, accuse this outgone government of having accumulated debts?
In your period,
as you said earlier, now who calls them?
In your period, Honorable, did you sign any energy agreement that captured the take or pay?
Of course, those are the foundation agreement. But,
so then the argument about them doing that, you also caught in the same web.
If you look at what the Energy Ministry negotiated, the take or pay in most of the contracts they renegotiated was limited. So that instead of the take or pay covering 100 megawatts, they negotiated to cover maybe, let's say, 50%, 50 megawatts. Those were the, renegotiated contracts. And so you just cannot ask the investor to forgo everything they had negotiated earlier in the foundation contract. You had to negotiate, give and take. Then they said that, okay, you don't want take or pay for 100 megawatts, but I cannot remove take or pay entirely from the contract. So you negotiate to a certain level. That's what the Ministry of Energy. I've heard some people say that we also negotiated take or pay. But go and see.
And that's the argument. That the same thing you accused.
Yeah, but
the previous administration, you were caught up in that same way.
No, but you have to look at the various contracts first.
So yours was a better one than them?
It was far better.
Why didn't you negotiate a deal that hadn't got that take or pay element?
If you are going to negotiate, don't forget that you are not alone in the negotiation. You are negotiating with somebody who also has his rights. You just don't say, okay, I will not do any business with you if you don't give me a contract without take or pay. Then yet you want that power company to continue to produce power. They also have rights, and so it's negotiation. But we are saying that rather than, cancel those contracts, which will have implications, penalties, you negotiate a relatively less burdensome or less strenuous contracts. And that is what the Minister of Energy did.
Oh, no, but you were part of the transitional team, and I just want to get clarity or some education on this. In your run-up to handing over, you as a financeman, did you sign the checks to make sure that our power plants were fueled or enough fuel there? Because the argument was that you failed to do that.
Oh, I don't think we should look at this from the point of view that you are expressing. First of all, the Ministry of Finance is not supposed to buy fuel for power generation.
You signed the checks?
You don't. Okay. You are not supposed to buy fuel for power generation. The Ministry of Finance only comes in to help. Okay, the sector is supposed to generate its revenue, which will be used to buy fuel. But Ministry of Finance is already taking a large chunk of the fuel burden. The Finance Minister pays entirely for Sankofa, the gas from Sankofa, which is the largest source of fuel for power generation. The Ministry of Finance has been paying it. Okay? The Ministry of Finance is not supposed to pay for Jubilee gas. Ghana Gas is supposed to pay. But there have been times the Ministry of Finance came in to bail out Ghana Gas. Okay? The Ministry of Finance is not supposed to pay for the Wakpi pipeline. GMPC is supposed to do that. And of course, they also do that from the tariffs. There have been times the Minister of Finance has come in to help in paying even for the transmission of the gas. Liquid fuel. The cash waterfall mechanism has made provision for the ECG and other companies in the sector to pay for the fuel. It's not Ministry of Finance. So when somebody immediately begins to accuse Ministry of Finance of not signing the checks, that person doesn't understand the industry and the role the various industry players are supposed to be playing. Now, at the time we left office, we did not have shortage of fuel. There was no shortage of fuel.
Was there enough
if there was shortage of fuel, if there was shortage of fuel, you would have experienced doom so. And is it not curious that the government that claimed that there was no fuel, right, to date is saying that we should have the assurance that there will not be doom. So what have they done?
Because they had to quickly rush and negotiate with WAPCO and try and get in some supplies to come in. That is why we were
Which supplies came in? You should ask. Which supplies?
Supplies didn't come in.
No, you should ask them. Where did they get any fuel from over the last 1 month? Did they bring in any new fuel? And from where? Ask them.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, you should ask them. Because they threaten every Ghanaian with doom so, just to blame the previous government. We haven't experienced that doom so, have we? And we were intending to win power as well. We didn't intend to lose this election. And so if my party won the election, we would have come to complain to the Ghanaian people that there was no fuel. we would have done that.
This is PM Express Business Edition, engaging the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin, and I'm assessing the economic record or report card of the previous administration and whether indeed the economy is recovering or is indeed stabilizing. Getting the thoughts of the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin. I'll be right back after this break. This is PM Express Business Edition. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we do an assessment of that report card of the previous administration when it comes to the economy. And indeed, what did they leave the state of the Ghanaian economy? Is it in crisis? Is it in tumbles or bad? And what has the former Minister of Finance got to say about all these concerns out there? Minister, thank you so much for your time. I know he's somebody you worked with at the committee level and engaged and all the rest. Dr. Kesil Atufosan, your colleague MP, is the Minister of Finance. What do you make of his nomination as the Minister of Finance?
Well, I mean, Honorable Atu is my good friend. I mean, we work together.
You have a very good relationship with him?
Yeah, we have good relationship. I mean, he was my ranking member on the Finance Committee. And being a ranking member, I mean, certainly he was a very important stakeholder. Even when I assumed office as Finance Minister, he was the minority leader. And you trust Atu. Atu will always debate on the economy. And so we interacted. But if I have to assess him...
Was he a pain in the neck for you as a Minister of Finance?
I mean, of course, to a large extent. Yes, to a large extent.
And so you can pick up the phone and call him, we talk?
Yeah. But it is important when you have people like that, which I intend to be, you know,
you're going to
in
be
this parliament. I promise to do...
Retaliation?
I promise to do the best I can to hold him accountable and to hold the entire government accountable for their management of our public finances and the management of the economy. And I will do that forcefully without any regrets. Because, no, Ghana needs a strong opposition to ensure that the government does not toy with our lives, to ensure that the government keeps track with particularly the gains we have handed over to them. They do not deviate from that.
But do you think that this time you also will have your report card as a comparison anytime you go putting them on to assess them?
This is why we are proud of our record. But as I said, if I have to assess him, I have to look at their track record. So in 2016, when the NDC left office, they were under an IMF program, but they failed miserably. As far as I mean, again, I'm coming to the data. As far as economic management, fiscal management, they failed woefully. Because at the time they left government, they recorded a growth rate of 3.4%. 3.4%. We are coming from a crisis. They didn't have COVID. They didn't have Russia-Ukraine war. They recorded 3.4%. We are doing average 6.4% last year. Okay? When it comes to fiscal deficits, on commitment basis, deficit 8.3%. When the data comes out, the final out comes out, you will see that we'll be doing around 3% on commitment basis. Primary balance, which is the anchor of the IMF program at the time, it is also the anchor of the IMF program now. They had a deficit of about 3%. When the data comes out, you will see we are going to have a surplus, primary balance on commitment basis. Let's come to the trade balance, the external balances. In terms of trade balance, they got a deficit 3%. We, by the end of December last year, 5.9% surplus trade balance. They had a deficit. Current account, they had a deficit of 2%. We, by the end of last year, did a surplus of 4%. Okay, so if you look at their track record in terms of economic management, then nobody needs to tell you that they failed. And this is the record they are bringing into government to manage the same economy.
But
and don't forget that.
The majority of Ghanaians who went to the poll said that they want them back to come and manage the economy.
Don't worry. You asked me to assess, and I'm doing my assessment. All right. And so I'm saying that the president at the time when they failed woefully to manage the economy was the same president we have today, President Mahama. His economic advisor now, Honorable Setepe, was the Minister for Finance. The minister now, my friend Atu, was the Deputy Minister for Finance. That is the record they are bringing into government. They don't have any other recent record apart from that. And if you are to go by that record, then you need to be worried. And don't forget that they were also under an IMF program. So if under an IMF program you perform so poorly, then what is that record you are bringing? But I want to say that Honorable Atu Forson was the driver's mate at the time. I've seen him closely. I've worked with him closely. I've interacted with him closely. I know that he's determined to do things different. I know that he's determined to grow the economy. I know that he's determined to keep the stability of the economy. And I've heard him make public commitments to that. And so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Because some will say that again.
I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
That he was not in control. He was
that's what I'm saying. He was a driver's mate, and now he's in charge.
Okay.
So
you give him that benefit of the doubt that based on the work he's done over the years, he can do a great work as a finance minister.
He has learned. He wasn't a PhD, now he's a PhD. He's led his side in parliament. He was a ranking member, on the finance committee. I know that he's a decent gentleman and he means well. So I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, starting with the budget he will present for the 2025. I will see whether he will continue to have a honeymoon or to be fire and fire to ensure that
he's at a different side right now, so things might be different because he's not in the position.
Yes, I'm saying that the budget he will present will show whether what I know him to be, what my expectations of him will be met. And we'll take it from there.
But Honorable,
I want to wish him well. He's a nice gentleman. He's hardworking gentleman. And I know that he means well for our country.
You give him the support he needs when it matters as the nation building the nation.
Of course, yes.
I mean, you talked about growth under their side and your side. Let's look at some will see that also again the quality of growth as well. Even with their poor assessment, inflation was quite down as well. You had a strong growth and inflation is high. Why do you respond to those arguments that the quality of growth also matters and not just the expansion?
Yes, why not? The quality of growth matters. And here we are talking about real growth rate. So why do you even bring in inflation? So those who say inflation was low, inflation is high, the quality of growth, they don't understand economics. I'm talking about real growth rate. The effect of inflation has already been discounted. So what do you want to say next?
Talking about the support which you talk about when it comes to building the national economy as well. President Mahama talked about a national dialogue, and we won't forget about Senchi. The committee has been put together. Let me first ask you, what do you make of this plan of, again, bringing everybody on board in building the economy and stabilizing the economy and picking up from where you left off, even though there are debates about whether it was in a good state or it was in a bad state?
I think it's misplaced priority.
To bring
the president is wasting everybody's time. Because there are so many ways of soliciting the views of people. I mean, I used to hold a monthly press briefing on the state of the economy. I used to get feedback. I introduced the quarterly roundtable at the University of Ghana. Experts digested issues and made recommendations. There are different platforms you can do that. But if you read the terms of reference for the committee that he set up, they are going to help us draw a homegrown fiscal consolidation. What do you mean by homegrown fiscal consolidation?
It means that they are asking, people voted for them. People want that approach in managing the economy.
So if they didn't understand the state of the economy, if they did not have an economic program for the country, why did they go putting it in their manifesto?
They had a program in their manifesto?
What is the program? So implement the program. Now the president is giving excuses that he inherited a struggling economy, so he wants to have a national economic dialogue, to have a conversation about the economy. But that is not a fact.
Don't you think that approach is better? Some are saying that you shut the door in getting consensus on several national economic issues. Debt exchange program is one.
That is not the case. Because if you look at the economy we handed over, I gave you the data. We handed over international reserves of $9 billion. That is 4 months of import cover. 1 month more than the IMF's own benchmark of 3 months of import cover. Okay? Growth rate of 6.4% average. Trade balance of 5.9% surplus. Current account balance of about 4% surplus. People say we borrowed more than they did. But when they left government, the debt to GDP was 73%. We left government with a debt to GDP of 72%.
Just 1%, some would say?
Yes. Why not?
So how have you grown the economy?
So why would the same people? So why would the same people say we overborrowed when you left government with a debt?
You're an economist. The dynamics about debt and arguments. It depends on where you stand.
I understand where you are coming from. Yeah. But allow me to make my point also. You accuse that I overborrowed. You left the country with a debt to GDP of 73%. I left the country with a debt to GDP of 72%. And I keep saying that when you talk about debts, you should look at the context properly. Look at GDP. Because your debt sustainability is measured in terms of GDP, in terms of how much you have generated out of the money you borrowed in economic activity. And I'm saying that between 2013 and 2016, we lost GDP of about $10 billion. Okay? From 56 billion, as Professor Mills handed over to President Mahama, to $55 billion by the time President Mahama left office. In the case of Akufo-Addo, he took it from 55 billion, and we are now in excess of $70 billion. So between the two, who borrowed responsibly and who used the borrowed money productively? And so I'm saying that the record we are living, we left for them, it's a good record.
You're not leaving the economy in a bad state. In a bad state. In the thing that the President Mahama has pushed that, let the ministers tell us the true state of the economy.
Yes, they should. And the budget will show.
They will vindicate you to actually
the budget they will present,
your administration.
The budget they present will show. And this data I'm giving to you, you have seen it. The Bank of Ghana published the data. You have seen it. Or you haven't seen it. You even reported on that.
I've seen it, yeah.
So, are we on Mars, as I asked earlier, that we do not have eyes to see? We do not have the analytical mind to analyze the data? And then all the president says is that the economy is in crisis, I inherited a struggling economy. The president is trying to make room for excuses.
He's just spent
and I am even worried. I am even worried.
Managing the economy, some would say.
And so
everything he promised in his 120-day contract, he's delivered on it.
And so is it not judgmental that the president would say, I've inherited a struggling economy before calling a national economic dialogue? Why can't he wait for the national economic dialogue to come out with the judgment?
Well, you'll be a very critical person in your party going forward.
Why would he not wait for the national economic dialogue to look at the figures and pass the judgment?
Maybe he has a different approach.
I already told you that the IMF, that they have been consulting since they came to government, they gave a judgment. 2nd December, we're talking about just 2 months ago. And they have briefed him. The World Bank has briefed him. The data is there, out there. Bank of Ghana has published. And they are also coming to publish the out-10 for 2024 in the budget.
Your fiscal data,
and
we
so
don't know the full year of it.
Yes.
What has
but
caused that?
I'm saying that you should ask them. Ask the new minister.
You know, I'm asking that.
They're supposed to have published it by now.
It was submitted to them in the
Yes, we left office on the 7th of January. And the people who prepare the fiscal data are in the ministry. He is the leader. He should publish it.
Oh, no, but
I'm sure they are waiting to publish it. No, you see, they are waiting to publish it in the budget statement. And I am not in a hurry.
You think the budget will vindicate your argument?
We have
about
already been
vindicated.
We have been vindicated already by some of the data that have been published by the Bank of Ghana. And you will see about 3 or 4, critical, figures that we are waiting to see from the budget statement. I've seen some prelims, but I just want to.
You don't want to talk about it. What are those numbers that you have seen?
They are looking good. You will see.
And the budget
I gave you even the primary balance on commitment basis. It's going to be a surplus. And this will be the first time Ghana is recording a surplus primary balance on commitment basis, which is the anchor of the IMF program. And that is a reflection of the fact that our debt levels are coming down.
Honorable, you play a very critical role in your party going forward. And one would ask that we knew what happened in Senchi. What would be the advice to your party when President John Mahama extends an official invitation to you as a former Minister of Finance to join them in this National Dialogue Program?
I mean, there are different ways I can communicate to the government. I already told you.
An official invitation to you and even your party.
I think that the party will decide. I am not in a position.
What advice will that?
I'm not in the position to decide. The party will decide.
You boycotted
the party will decide to the effect that he is going to have a national economic dialogue that will go and misinform the Ghanaian people about our record. Why should we be part of it? Because our record is out there.
That is debatable now, because you say that, the approach is that bring everybody on board.
That is what, no.
To build a consensus on how the economy, the problems facing the economy can be addressed.
George,
that is the approach.
George, I'm saying that the president has already passed a judgment that he inherited a struggling economy.
That could be a political statement.
Let me make my point. That he inherited a struggling economy. He inherited a bad economy. And he's now calling a national economic dialogue to just come and whitewash the claims he made. Nothing else.
So it means you won't be part of that.
Nothing else. He's calling a national economic dialogue to whitewash the claims he made, the unfounded, baseless claims he made about the economy. Because you have seen the data, and you know. And it's not just today. You have been reporting on economic data, not today. From last year, what we did, our performance from last year, started from the beginning of the year. In the first quarter, you know what happened? When the economy grew by about 4%. In the second quarter, when it grew by about 7%. In the third quarter, when it grew by about 7.2%. And we don't generate the data at the Ministry of Finance. It is generated by the Ghana Statistical Service, which is independent of us. And this has been validated by the Bank of Ghana, which is also independent of the Ministry of Finance. Then the president will come out and say, he doubts the figures.
So I get from you the indication is that, Honorable,
do you also doubt the figures? Do you doubt the figures?
I don't doubt the figures when it's coming from the Ghana Statistical Service, when it's coming from Bank of Ghana.
So that is the point.
It's not coming from a politician.
Yes. So you don't doubt the figures. And the figures are generated by Bank of Ghana, Statistical Service, you know, the World Bank, the IMF, they all have way. So how is it that all the data generated by all these agencies are consistent? As a result of which the IMF passed our review. First review, second review, third review. How come that the only person that does our data is President Mahama?
You were
and all these institutions have data which is consistent with each other.
You were a politician. Do you care about the signals it sends to your constituency when the argument is made that everybody should come on board and let's build an economy because it affects everyone? Yes, we have learned our lessons. We may have struggled, but we need your input.
So look at it this way.
A national forum to stabilize things for everyone.
Look at it this way. All should come on board for us to think about the economy. But you are bad manager of the economy. Do you really want me at the table?
That was still on the political platform.
Do you really want me on board? You are a bad manager of the economy. Now, everybody, come to the table and let's think about how to manage the thing. Do you need me there? So he needs to really build better consensus and not politically influenced consensus. Politically influenced consensus will not take this country anywhere because that was what they did at Senchi. And what became of the economy? What became of the economy? They didn't implement even the recommendations. And they failed to achieve the targets of the IMF program. The program was drilled by their poor performance, in spite of the consensus they are supposed to have achieved at Senchi. What will be different about this new consensus they want to build?
But what do you think is...
Don't forget that we already have consensus on a fiscal consolidation program, a PCPEG. The president is throwing it away because that consensus was achieved under NPP, and so he has to achieve a new consensus. We shouldn't be toying with the lives of the people of Ghana. Just because I'm in charge, I must also do something which has been done. We are wasting resources. if he wants the PC peg to be reviewed. That is important. And so we can see where the shortfall, the shortcoming of the PC peg is. Then we can look at how to build upon it. In that case, it's already building consensus. Because we did the PC peg. He wants to review it and to bring in additional things. We will go to the table. But you come out and say, you're a bad manager of the economy. Now let's have consensus. What consensus are you talking about? So I think that you media people must be asking the relevant questions. The questions you have asked me, turn around and ask President Mahama or Honorable Atuforsen the opposite of the questions you asked me. And let's see if we are really serious about building and sustaining the gains of this economy.
Honorable, what do you think that is the way forward in trying to, some would say that we all have an economy to build, and your experience you have gathered in governance can never be thrown away, in having a national consensus on building this economy going forward for everyone?
National consensus is important, particularly when it relates to the economy, which affects everybody. But it should be a genuine desire to seek proper consensus and not for political objectives, which I see happening with this National Economic Dialogue. You've seen all the planning committee members selected. You've seen the list.
Yes, I've seen the list, yes.
So who are the independent thinkers on that committee?
I believe that the letter was extended
to
anybody, not you, even anybody in your party. I doubt that they would have stepped down on that.
Independent thinkers, people who are not political.
Yeah.
Who are they on that committee?
Honorable, let's look at revenue, because it appears it's a big challenge for us. Yeah. How do we get around the revenue challenge? Because you have been there, you've seen the bigger picture. There are some who go for the route of let's increase taxes. There are some who say that no, let's reduce the rates, let's make sure that everybody pays. How do we get around that revenue mobilization challenge? Because the program, IMF program you signed up to, is on a path of mobilize the required revenue to expand the economy.
Yeah, I mean, this is important. When I listen to Honorable Atuforsen, when Parliament Appointment Committee was vetting him, I mean, he was asked a question on how he will stabilize the economy. I noticed he put too much emphasis on expenditure rationalization, you know. But,
is that possible?
But expenditure rationalization should be looked at side by side with revenue, you know. Also because under our IMF program, you do not need to just achieve certain fiscal targets on the fiscal side, but on the debt side and the revenue side, you have to achieve some targets. You know, one of the measures is debt to revenue ratio, and so you may cut down expenditure, but if you have shortfalls in revenue, you may be missing the other measure, which is very critical measure of our economic performance. And so revenue side is important. The good news is that our government, the NPP government, at the time, you know, managed to bring revenue levels up significantly. I mean, when we took over from the NEC in 2016, the tax revenue to GDP was around 13%. Today, by the time we left office, it rose to about 17% of GDP. You know, that's a huge quantum in GDP terms, how much additional revenues we have brought in. And this was why we were confident not to introduce new taxes last year. We also did not increase rates for existing taxes last year. We just thought that we could use improved mechanisms to collect the money. And to that extent, we succeeded significantly in collecting up to around 154 billion Ghana cedis relative to a target of about 145 billion Ghana cedis. So there was an increase of about 4.8% over the year before, over the target, and about 34% over the year before. So that was impressive performance, and I hope that the Minister for Finance will continue to pursue the strategies that we we used to increase the revenue. We just cannot afford to experience revenue shortfall, even if we don't increase taxes or introduce new taxes. And I do not expect him to increase taxes or introduce.
He's promising to take some tax on those off.
Yeah, he even wants to take some taxes out of. Once he's able to still meet the revenue target, I don't have any problem with that. And this was why I didn't bring in new taxes or even increase the rates for existing taxes last year. You know, we didn't do that in the 2024 budget. We didn't do that in the mid-year budget, and so I have no problem with what he wants. Even our party also promised if we won, we would have scrapped the e-levy. E-levy is bringing you about 2 billion Ghana cedis, and then also the COVID levy is bringing you about 3 billion Ghana cedis. The two together is about 5 billion Ghana cedis you will be losing, you know. And so around mid-year budget, I had proposed that we should even scrap these taxes.
And why did you do that on our
own? We had difficulty because our analysts, our advisors and our experts did the analysis and said there was no way we were going to get, you know, any new revenue from any other source that will ensure that we kept the revenue target in order to be consistent with the debt service to revenue target of 18%, which we have signed with the IMF. That was the only reason we didn't do that. But they are a new government. They are now going to present a budget, and so they have that opportunity to scrap it.
There's always talk about cut, and some have also raised the argument about the rigidity of our budget. You were there. Is there really room to cut when it comes to rationalizing expenditure? There is the moral thing to do. There's the optics. What about some would say the reality on the ground in terms of the room to cut down the expenditure?
So if you look at our budget as it is today, the structure of the budget as it is today, the bulk of your money goes to
salaries,
compensation, yes, salaries, compensation, and also debt service, which you have to do. You can't run away from your debt service. Otherwise, you default. And when you default, what happened to us? Many other countries will happen, and it will not be palatable at all. What goes to capex is just about 3-4% of GDP. So the question you really ask is, where do you have to cut? Do you have to cut capex, which is already inadequate, woefully inadequate? Do you have to cut salaries, in which case are you going to lay off workers? You know, or do you have to cut debt service payment, in which case you default? Where are you going to cut?
So there's no room?
Yeah, there is no room. So you just have to improve on your revenue in order to meet at reasonable levels your capex and then also salaries. If you have to cut, some have proposed that you should reduce, you know, the staff levels in public service. Okay, and this is why I believe that sometimes they do head count in order to establish the true numbers of public service workers and whether there are ghost names so that they can eliminate the ghost names. You know, these are in my view, the outliers that you will have to focus on in order to reduce wastage and then ensure that people are not paid for work they have not done. Other than that, have you ever heard throughout our history that we've cut expenditure, except in addressing issues of ghost names and doing head counts? You know, have we ever cut expenditure? Because where are you going to cut? You have to lay off workers and cut salaries and compensation, or you have to stop doing the roads, the hospitals, and thereby you cut your capex, which is already 3% of GDP, or you have to stop servicing your debts and defaults. So that is the dilemma. And I think that it will take us a long time to have a new configuration of our budgeting processes. But what is critical is that we must do everything to enhance revenue collection. Too many people are not paying their taxes, and we must find ways to bring them into the tax net so that we can collect the taxes for the goods they produce, for the services they provide, in order to support the national infrastructure financing. This is what we really need to do as a country.
Indeed, finding more innovative ways to deal with the revenue challenge facing the economy, and also the rigidity of our budget, and where can be cut and where cannot be cut. Indeed, we've been engaging the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin, in terms of assessing the report on the economy and his thoughts about certain critical things this new administration is doing. Indeed, some will say the verdict is out there. Time will tell whether they will be vindicated or not. This has been PM Express Business Edition, engaging the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin. And Doc, where will you be up to? I know you're a member of Parliament. Consultancy?
No, I'm going to do my full parliamentary job.
Work.
Yeah, full parliamentary work.
I knew you lectured at Legon as well.
That is why the people of Karaga sent me back to Parliament, because they know I can be of a valuable asset to our country, and I do not intend to let them down. I do not intend to disappoint them. And so I will do my full parliamentary work and ensure that this government is held accountable for the economic management of our country, in order for us to generate benefits that the people of Karaga will also tap into to improve on their conditions of life.
Indeed, this has been PM Express Business. You heard him, he'll be fully committed to parliamentary work. So let's see what he'll be saying on the economy and financial issues. This has been PM Express Business Edition, engaging the former Minister of Finance, Dr. Mohammed Amin. Indeed, have a great day.